Thank you, Mark. Well, I have butterflies. You guys are great. It's amazing to talk with a very experienced, knowledgeable group about the Air Force. And I want to thank also the 15th Army Air Force Reunion Organization Committee, Mark and Dave, and so many of the others of you all who've helped and staying up late and getting up early in the morning. I want to really thank you so very much. I also want to thank the 15th for taking on the rest of us. You know, there are 4 of us from the 99th Battle Group. Anyway, so we appreciate that the 15th has taken a lot of other squadrons and battle groups, and we can all still share our memories and our parents' and our grandparents' stories. So my father was a veteran, and Air Force, of course, and after World War II, he was also a Korean War and a Cold War veteran. He was a command pilot. He flew 5,335 hours, and his name was Richard Ernest Evans, but he was known as Eager Evans because he was so gung-ho in everything he did. So the presentation is about his story, and I'll even have some quotes from his book, and we are selling the book. And the book, all proceeds go to the Air Force Aid Society, all proceeds. And we're very excited about that. So as the title implies, this book is about coming of age. It's a coming of age story. And the title is Richard Eager, a pilot story from Tennessee Eagle Scout to General Montgomery's Flying Fortress. So the story covers unique experiences in the war and unique experiences outside of the war or learning to be a pilot. My father loved telling stories. Many men and women who suffered through World War II under surreal circumstances did not want to remember those days. But later in life, my father was able to write about those difficult times. He felt there were lessons to learn, people to remember, and most of all, tales to tell of the bravery of the American military and their families at home during World War II. With humility, honesty, and some humor, Evans shared personal lessons on perseverance, loyalty, fairness, fear, and respect. He wrote with great detail, so you could clearly imagine the scene as he described it. For example, this is the very first paragraph of the book, 2 paragraphs. This story begins not by the parting of a curtain on a Shakespearean stage, but by letting parting of the flap on a tent, GI tent, pitched atop a hill in Algeria. The tent looked out upon a broad valley, stretching 400 miles from the low Oris Mountains that form the Tunisian frontier in the east of the snow-capped high Atlas Range, and that formed the Moroccan frontier in the west. It was spring 1943 when the tent flap parted. It was 600 hours. It was chilly but not cold. I had washed up as well as one could with a GI helmet as a wash basin. Coffee was brewing in my jury-rigged aviation fuel-powered stove. No combat missions were scheduled with Colonel Up the Grove's 99th Bomb Group, Major General Doolittle's 5th Wing, General Eisenhower's African Theater. They were standing down to let the weather go by, so also their mechanics could bring all the B-17s up to and ready status for the missions ahead. So, Warrant Officer House rapped on my tent ropes and called out, "Captain Evans, Colonel Up the Grove wants to see you. His tent, 7:30 hours." And so the story begins. The 21 chapters my father wrote in the early 1990s, the heart and soul of this book are those 21 chapters. Chapter drafts were sent to family members, and we read, commented, encouraged, and continued to encourage him as he went through the process. Though Evans was writing 50 years after the war, many memories were frightfully clear, but some subconsciously blurred and later drawn out. He had compiled personal letters, photos, and many notes and references to add context to his stories. He also wrote a humorous glossary in pilot's vernacular. There are 150 iconic photos, primary historic Air Force materials, an extensive timeline are also in the book. My father passed away in 2006. My family and I vowed to publish the book, especially given the interest in the B-17 Flying Fortress and General Montgomery's use of the Flying Fortress, and my father being Field Marshal Montgomery's pilot. How many of you watched the Apple TV 9-part series, Masters of the Air? It was fabulous, wasn't it? Really fabulous. Might you ask, where was Captain Evans during that time the bloody 100th BG was bombing Berlin and German military factories? I'll present a few facts. Spring 1943, the 100th BG, comprising of 4 squadrons, total of 36 B-17s, arrived at RAF base Thorpe Abbotts. First mission was June 25th, 1943. During that time period, Captain Evans had already flown 25 missions, having arrived in North Africa February 1943. Then, June 13th, 1943, he was commanded, and I say commanded, to pilot General Montgomery in the American B-17 Teresa Lita. And she was a B-17E. So, along the way, my father, let me give you a little picture here, met King George VI, British General Maitland Wilson, Air Marshal Douglas, General LeMay, General Upthegrove, the revered 99th BG commander, and more are mentioned in the book's pages. And most notably, my father was chosen to pilot a B-17E for Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, 1st Viscount Montgomery of Alamein, commander of the British 8th Army. Ultimately, in writing this book, I know my father wanted to honor those he met along the way and share their stories of courage during very, very trying times. He tells the story of those whose names are known in history books, but also those who are not known by name or who did not survive the war. Of those lesser-known heroes, Captain Evans was always grateful for the men and women who made up the Army Air Force ground crews. They were the ones who worked through the days and the nights in horrible weather, constant insects, health problems, and severe temperatures to repair planes for the next mission. They were the ones who packed your parachute. They were the ones who stood by for takeoff, waited patiently for their planes to return. They were the ones who supported all aspects of smooth-running military base upon the middle of deserts, raw, flooded fields, forest, scrub oak hills, with minimal housing blasted by miserable weather. We had several goals for this book. One is to present it because it is a piece of history to the wonderful military museums we have in this area of the United States and Great Britain. So for that reason, we gave what I call the museum edition. It's a little heavier in paper to these wonderful museums, and they accepted this book into their archives. Sometimes it took a couple of weeks, sometimes a couple of months, but they accepted this book, and they sent me letters of appreciation. And several of these museums are the Imperial War Museum in London, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum in Nebraska, the Boeing Museum of Flight, and the National Museum of the Air Force, and more. Goal 2 was that the book proceeds, as I've already mentioned, went to the Air Force Aid Society, and that was in an endowment, a scholarship endowment for the rest, as long as, for 100 years, because it is permanently endowed. And we're very excited. I even have the name of the most recent person who received a grant. So anyway, that is why we are enjoying telling people about this book. The third goal was to do this for my father. And so many of you are doing the same thing. You've got family histories, you've got movies. It's amazing what you all are doing to keep the stories alive. And I so appreciate it because your story also helps my father's story, because it's almost like they were at the same place on the same day, and this person had another story, but it lines up with your story, and that's what's so exciting about sharing all this. Who was Richard Eager Evans? That is him, by the way. This was a picture I'd never seen before in my whole life until I went into the archives in Knoxville, Tennessee. He is the one holding the tip of the American flag in his ROTC uniform. Of course, they're all in ROTC uniform. Anyway, that is Evans. He was a young man with the heart and humor of a young Eagle Scout. Coming of age during World War II, his interest in the U.S. Army Air Corps started when joining the Knoxville High School ROTC, and then later training in Tennessee Air National Guard. He entered the U.S. Army Air Corps December 28, 1939. Graduated from flying school as a lieutenant, trained others to fly and navigate for several years. Finally, January 21st, 1943, Captain Evans, he was a captain then, flew a B-17 over the southern Atlantic route with the 99th BG to enter the war zone, North Africa and Mediterranean. While flying with the 99th BG over North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Evans earned his majority rank and later was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and several other awards, some of them with oak leaves and things like that. When the Korean War began, Evans was called back from Air Force Reserves to active duty. He became lieutenant colonel and flew the B-47, the B-52. He retired from the Air Force as a full colonel and a commander of the B-58 Test Squadron. During his 20-plus years, Evans flew planes covered in fabric to those who could fly at the speed of sound. He was a command pilot who flew the B-17, the B-29, B-47, B-52, and the B-58 Hustler, and witnessed the incredible innovations of the golden age of aviation. There he is by one of those fabric planes. That was early training, very early training. Richard was named, as I mentioned, Richard Eager, for his overeagerness in being a cadet. And there he is on the very right-hand side. He was head of his squadron at that time. Within the book, my father describes his memories of cadet training, combat missions, and experience with the top brass, and provides a fascinating first-hand account of World War II pilot at a time when military aviation was evolving extremely fast. I love this picture. He's in the center, and that is a group of navigation students on the tail of a plane, and I could not recognize the plane, though. With, as soon as second lieutenant, at that time graduated from flying school, his first orders were to teach new students. And that's all and good, except he didn't get to get into the war as soon as he wanted to. So they kept him for 2 years. And during that time, though, he learned to fly these other planes and also to learn how to fly in emergency situations, especially the B-17. It's easy to forget that at this time, as planes evolved from propeller to later jet engines, the training curve was steep, and trial and error was the norm. Many in training lost their lives before even entering the war. He had a great family. That's his father, 3 brothers, and a mom. And his father was called Pops. His brothers, all of them went into the Air Force. 3 bombardier pilots and 1 navigator. I might add that Pops, the book is dedicated to his father. There was another character in the book. You might recognize a dog there. The dog was Judge, and everybody has you all had special dogs in your life, and probably special cats too. Among the Knoxville chapters is a particular poignant story about Judge, and many of the reviewers of the book think this chapter is particularly nice to read and a little poignant. Monty, General Montgomery. How exactly did an Eagle Scout from Tennessee come to pilot one of the most accomplished leaders of the Allied forces? In short, it was the result of a bet between General Montgomery and General Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, and I will describe. But first, appreciate the rarity of this bet. It is useful to know a little bit about Monty. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery was one of the most prominent and successful British commanders of the Second War, known as Monty. He notably commanded the Allies against General Rommel in North Africa and in the invasion of Italy and France. James Holland, a renowned British historian, author, and broadcaster, known for his comprehensive histories of World War II, has consistently portrayed General Montgomery as a brilliant commander. Monty was adept at anticipating the capabilities of his troops and effectively managed their resources to support the Army. Holland highlights Montgomery's ability to devise astute battle plans, and that ensured in victory. In other words, he wasn't going into battle unless he knew he was going to have victory. However, he also acknowledged Montgomery's flexibility in adjusting plans when unforeseen circumstances arose. Montgomery was known to be arrogant, unlikable, but untimely successful. He famously lacked diplomacy and tact when dealing with others, but his directness made him a great military leader, and his army was grateful. People did not mince words when describing Monty. Winston Churchill said of Monty, you'll love this, in defeat, unbearable. In defeat, unbeatable. You know what's coming next. In victory, unbearable. As for my father, the relationship with Monty was respectful and rocky. There are numerous stories that feature their time and flights together in this book, including one with an emergency landing in Palermo that led to a bit of tension, to say the least, which I will explain later. Back to the bet. I love this picture. I was able to get it from the Imperial War Museum. In fact, for the book, I was able to get 10 fabulous, iconic photos from the Imperial War Museum. And I have to say, it wasn't cheap. You have to buy the license. But anyway, it's so fabulous. So here he is, a picture of him in Sfax, Tunisia, and this is part of the story. General Montgomery received a B-17, winning a controversial bet with American General Bedell Smith, which General Eisenhower was forced to cover. Monty told Smith that his army would reach Sfax, Tunisia, before the Americans. And if he did, he should be rewarded with the use of an American B-17 Flying Fortress. He did, in fact, reach Sfax first, and Smith and Eisenhower were rather surprised that he called in the terms of the bet when everyone thought it had been a joke. Eisenhower and Monty's commander, Sir Alan Brooke, were furious. Brooke reprimanded Monty for crass stupidity. Everyone knew that all B-17s were needed for missions and not to fly an American plane as a taxi. Why exactly did British General want an American B-17 with an American pilot and a flight crew and probably paid by the American taxpayer? And the British wondered, why does our general want to fly in an American plane? Most people don't know Winston Churchill's first pick for replacement commander to drive German General Rommel out of North Africa was General Gott. Gott was in flight to take up his post in Cairo when German ME-109s, this is in North Africa, intercepted his British Bristol Bombay transport plane and attacked. The plane was damaged, crash landed, and several who survived the landing were then killed by the returning fighters who strafed the plane, and it blew up. 18 were killed, including General Gott. A few did escape the onslaught to tell the story. General Montgomery was the next pick to command the British Eighth Army in North Africa. Was it pride and arrogance or self-preservation for Monty to want a B-17? What do you think? The next fact was the general wanted to travel quickly from camp to camp without the entourage of fighter escort. He wanted to call up, get in this plane, and take off. So he chose the aptly named Flying Fortress, an aircraft that had 9 guns. And here they are. You can see pictures of where the guns are located, and most of you already know. And it was also famous for landing even after being shot up and torn apart with holes and rips and lost engines and everything like that. And also the crews were coming home in beat-up airplanes, but they had great confidence the B-17 could make it. Well, Monty had that same confidence. There she is, Teresa Lita, B-17E, 19082, 1943 to 1945. Teresa Lita was new once, assigned to the 301st Battle Group, and flown to Britain over the North Atlantic air ferry route April 7th, 1942. She was transferred to the 97th BG and later the 92nd BG and reassigned to the 12th Army Air Force. She was used to train new crews when she became the prize in the bet between Montgomery and Eisenhower. By the spring of 43, she was well worn, her paint was chipped, her wires were showing. She was considered a hangar queen, but the right attention, especially if the General Montgomery was going to take this plane, from well-trained mechanics and engineers, she could still fly with the best of them. Now, she is a B-17E. And she was regulated to be into more of a training plane because the B-17Fs had just come out and they were flying. So I was wondering why she didn't receive the recognition that a lot of B-17s have received. And after all, she was the plane that General Montgomery flew around in. That's pretty cool. But, the ones we all remember, the Memphis Belle, the Thunderbird, 909, Ye Old Pub, All-American, Aluminum Overcast, Sentimental Journey, The Swoosh, and Swamp Ghost. All of these are known to all of you. So why wasn't Teresa Lita? Monty's office. Here's a picture there of Monty looking out of the captain's window at his B-17. And also that was his office, built in the B-17. And as you can see, there's a desk, and there's a hook with his coat hanging on it, and there's a little lamp. and also there was a rug over the rug was over the bombardier area. And of course, there's also another chair, I've learned. And this is where he spent a lot of time writing his diaries and his orders while he was going from, a couple hours from one place to the next in North Africa. Looks kind of cozy, right? Monty was in the Trisalita office one time in a particularly harrowing flight. The story is Patton and Palermo. The date was July 28th, 1943. It is a long story about a most important meeting. General Montgomery, with his commanders, had to fly to Palermo to meet with General Patton and his commanders. It was imperative that they meet to further their plans to complete the invasion of Sicily. Patton sent word that field was satisfactory for all types of aircraft. However, upon arrival, as Captain Evans viewed the territory below to see where he was supposed to land, it became very clear that Patton's aviation knowledge did not match his expertise in tank warfare. What was Captain Evans to do? Was he going to fly Monty and the group back, or was he going to land on that field? And a little side story is that a DC-3 landed ahead of them, and it ran into the small scrub oak, and it started smoking. So the smoke wafted across the field. So my father could see there was a good headwind. And he thought, okay, I can make it. I know how big the field is. There's a headwind coming. I can tell by the smoke. And so he said and he was also going to go at an angle of the field, so that would make the field a little longer, of course. So that was why he decided to land, because he felt like he maybe should have taken everybody back because it wasn't safe. Anyway, so it was imperative, as I mentioned, that he bring the flight in. And this quote, and this gives you a hint of how bad the landing was. This quote was found in Monty's 8th Army HQ War Diary, dated 3 days after the Palermo visit. The following message to General Bedell Smith gives you a hint on what kind of landing Captain Evans had to do to save the plane and its occupants. The quote is, "C-47 has arrived. Thank you very much. Am glad to have it. I escaped a nasty accident in Fortress only by skill of pilot and might have been killed." Any guesses about the kind of landing it was? Well, it was a ground loop, which is very hard to do. But they were able to do it. But the other problem was when they started to land, they pressed the brakes, and both brakes were gone. So pilots, of course, can also maneuver their planes by turning engine, flaps. And I don't know if some of you have probably already done ground loops in your life if you've flown, but it's very tricky. But fortunately, there was a headwind, but they had made a ground loop. It was very, very, very difficult, very scary. If the wings go down hit the soil, hit the dirt rather, they crash. Or if you get the propellers hooked, it's bad. So they made it. And there's my father on the left teaching Montgomery how to fly the plane, and then Montgomery's enjoying flying the plane. As mentioned before, the general and the captain had some time together in the B-17 cockpit. It was on such occasion that Monty noticed that Trisalita's number 3 engine propeller wasn't working. And that was close to him. Of course, the third number 3 is right over there, if I was going this way. So this was very upsetting, of course, for the general, and I will read to you from the book what happened. Suddenly, Monty's hand grasped my shoulder with unexpected force, and a frightful rasping sound came from his throat. I turned and was alarmed to see fear in General Montgomery's face. He got his breath in a moment and half shouted, half choked, "It stopped! It stopped! The engine stopped! It's not running!" Scary moment. General Montgomery's left hand clutched my shirt front. As I turned toward him, his right arm thrown back toward the window on his side was pointing towards number 3 engine. He was trying to say something, but no sound was coming from him. He couldn't get it out. My eyes quickly came to focus on that prop blade, pointing straight up, still as death, framed by the co-pilot's window and Monty's face. "Oh my God," I shouted to my inner self. "How could you have not warned General Montgomery? How have you forgotten that you had feathered number 3 engine? You were so busy showing off Boeing's great flying fortress, you clean forgot that you had feathered that bloody engine." I could see that he was beginning to settle down and came out of it. He had been pushing up against the seat belt, which incidentally was doing the job. There was an emergency in the cockpit, and it hadn't let go of him. And then General Montgomery asked a perfectly good question. In an unexpected, strong voice, he asked, "Why, in God's name, would you just turn it off?" He was looking directly into my eyes for the first time during our few days together. I wondered if he saw the terror, which I was sure they must have been reflecting. I was terrorized, I confess, not by the airplane, but by Monty. Number 3 engine was feathered or resting because it was badly leaking oil. Evans wanted to reduce oil loss and would start up engine 3 just before reaching their destination so the landing would be balanced. Panicking the general was heavy on his heart, for he had deep respect for Monty. Monty and the King. Monty's pilot, it was appropriate for Captain Evans to meet the King, George VI, on his visit to North Africa. The popular King traveled to North Africa in June 1943 to visit the troops and support the leaders in the British and Allied armed forces. On the 19th, one of his stop-offs was the airfield in Castel Benito, Tripoli, Libya. Monty took the occasion to show off his B-17 and his American crew. The general requested that the plane be positioned in full view of the marching bands, the army ranks, the generals, and the King. So that first picture, there's Captain Evans getting the eye from General Montgomery. And next to Captain Evans is his co-pilot. So, and the other picture is Monty introducing the King to my father. And I'll go on. The King reviewed the troops and met Captain Evans and his flight crew. And that is the flight crew behind Captain Evans right there, being introduced to the King. Both were a little nervous. The King was known to be shy. And for Captain Evans, how many times does a Knoxville boy, Tennessee, get to meet a king? What could they possibly talk about? British allies might have blushed to hear this, but the crux of my father's interaction with the King actually centered on a particular medical discomfort that thousands of soldiers in war-torn North Africa were experiencing, including the King. What do you think it was? I'll give you a hint. Bad water, bad food. Yes, dysentery. So, in many ways, the B-7, and that's what they talked about, which is kind of strange, but my father actually set him, the King, at ease. He said, "We all have it, sir." The engine startup was very special. In many ways, the B-17 is a central character of this book. This was, as you all know, a fabulous plane built by Boeing, well-engineered, could take a huge beating, as previously mentioned. There are many heroic stories World War II history books about brave crews who managed to survive and fly a crippled B-17. Captain Evans could fly most of the bombers and fighters available in World War II. He flew the B-17, B-24, B-25, B-26, B-29, a P-38, a P-47, an A-20, and a P-51. But of course, the Flying Fortress was his favorite. There are many detailed descriptions of flying, landing, troubleshooting in a B-17 within this book. In this passage, it faithfully depicts my father's respect for the power of the plane. And this is what Captain Evans wrote. Engine startup was always a special, never to be forgotten moment for my fellow combat air crewmen and for me. I was always impressed when the B-17s roared to life preparatory to a combat mission. The silence that pervaded the airfield would suddenly be shattered as first the formation leader's single engine, then another and another would roar to life. In a very few minutes, the entire area would be overwhelmed by the sound of Wright Cyclone Model R 1820-97 9-cylinder engines. It was an unforgettable experience, some sight, some sounds, some goosebumps. No matter how many times I experienced it, I never became so jaded to think the event commonplace. My heart would beat faster when I was just one of the pilots of one of those large formations which we routinely put into the air hundreds of times during the war. Because of my father's description of the Flying Fortress, my husband and I decided we wanted to fly in one, to hear the engines, the brakes, smell the oil, feel the wings take flight, just as Captain Evans did. How many of you all have had the opportunity to fly in a B-17? Oh, that's wonderful. Look at that. Wow. The 909. B-17G, owned by Collins Foundation, landed in Santa Barbara. The foundation would send several vintage World War II planes around USA to educate the curious who would visit the air shows. They came to Santa Barbara May 2nd, 2015, and John and I bought a ride. Many friends asked, why? Aren't you afraid? Those planes, they're so old, they might crash. To document the B-17 flight, I took some very amateur cell phone videos through old windows. The views are blurry, but the sights and sounds still hold meaning. Listen to the engines, the 4 Wright Cyclone 9-cylinder engines. Hear the brakes, the creaks of metal on metal. You are hearing what thousands of pilots heard daily for hundreds and thousands of flight years through World War II. So I do have, next. Okay, there she is, the 909. And the first video, do listen for the brakes, the revved up engines, and the takeoff with full throttle. I wanted it to be louder, but I think it's as loud as it's going to get. She was louder. The second video is walking through the B-17. Hard to imagine 9 or 10 crew working in the tight confines of this airplane. Noted in the fuselage were bare structural elements of the plane, bundles of bare wiring, and thousands of rivets. Imagine the crew dealing with long, long hours, bulked up, wearing their fleece-lined uniforms at high altitude for freezing temperatures, and attached to oxygen masks. This video shot is down the B-17 spine toward the tail, and this is through the opening called the top hatch, where the radio operator could shoot a gun, and also it was used for emergency escape on a water landing. From top hatch, I continued to the waist gunner's window. You will see the barrel of the .50 caliber machine gun, followed by the pilot's views. Third video is the Norden bomb sight. Everybody knows about that, and views through the B-17's nose. And as you do know, the Norden bomb sight was most important for precision bombing, and they were kept very well guarded and secret. I love this picture. The last clip is landing, and I think, well, you can hear the reverse thrust of the propellers, and let me. "909. I'm very sad to say that on October 2nd, 2019, 909, this very plane crashed. The aviation community was stunned and distressed by the tragic loss of life, but also for the implication of keeping these old birds flying. What happened to Teresa Lita after the Allied invasion of Sicily and the Italian mainland? Those airfields were short, and so the Teresa Lita was not flown as often. She was written off from inventory on June 22nd, 1945, and I don't know where she went. And the American crew, the original crew of 9 who flew with Monty, 4 of them were killed with another crew in another B-17, which crash-landed in Bizerte, Tunisia. Let's see, that's the B-47, okay. People ask, what did your father do after the war? He was called back in the Air Force from reserve status to serve during the Korean Cold War. Colonel Evans continued to fly many planes as part of Strategic Air Command under General LeMay. And did I miss one? Oh, I forgot. That's the B-47, of course, being refueled. And that actual picture, Dad is the pilot in that plane. And that was out of Florida, Tampa, Florida. And this is, of course, the iconic B-52. Still, they're in the air, right? Let's see, there was, how many of them? I looked that up, and now I can't find it. So, oh, here it is. 72. There are 72 B-52s in use by the Air Force. That's pretty good for an airplane. There's the B-58 Hustler, Mach 2, or it could. The detail of these planes and my father's involvement in their development and testing is included in the epilogue and chronology of the book. And I wanted to go back to one other spot that I missed. we found in a quote written by General Curtis LeMay, a personal autograph found in my father's book or copy of LeMay's book, Iron Eagle. I don't know how many people have read that, but it's a very interesting book about LeMay and Strategic Air Command. But this was the quote: "To Dick, who directed our B-47 and B-58 ops suitability test programs, flew our first 25, 30, and 35-hour multi-refueling B-47 missions, planned and led our first B-47 wing deployment to the UK, and directed our MAD and SAC B-70 source selection boards. With thanks for your help in building SAC into the world's mightiest force for peace." Okay. Now I'm near the end. I'm going to be on time. This is my father. I called it After a Day's Work. That's the B-58 behind him. The book is dedicated to Colonel Evans's father, Pops, the Knoxville High School principal for 40 years. Colonel Evans recognized his father's profound influence upon his life. But there is much written about General Montgomery, too. Within the final pages of the book, Evans wrote, here's the comments that he wrote. "For Monty had many of the fine personal characteristics I admired in my father. Bernard Law Montgomery and William Ernest Evans shared a highly principled confidence in the way they led their lives, a confidence born of strong convictions. Each was loyal to his country and concerned for his fellow man. Both used their God-given intellect to become wise in their professions. Part of their wisdom was the belief to only take risk if there was true clarity that something of great consequence would be gained. Monty followed that belief, though often he was misunderstood. For example, he held back his troops on certain war fronts until he knew they could win. Ernest Evans taught generations of students and families to carefully weigh all risks before making serious life decisions. Dad, although had a patient heart, profound humility, and demonstrated leadership in his own quiet way. Monty was much more direct in his demeanor, but no less sincere." So this is the end. I am so privileged and enjoyed so much being able to tell you part of the story. And just to mention that, again, this is the Air Force, all proceeds of the book go to the Air Force AIDS Society. So thank you very much.